What's it like to work on a game that's also an esport, and how do you approach patching and balancing when it comes to a competitive esport standpoint? Today we'll be tackling those questions with Patrick Scarborough, a former game designer at Riot Games. Patrick, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Chad. I'm happy to be here.
Patrick, what makes a good esport?
I see. So, I'm glad you asked, Chad. No, I think real talk. There is kind of this idea, I think, among fledgling game designers that I could come up with the perfect set of mechanics that are going to make an esport, right? I could design like chess, but
the perfect numbers.
It's like, but that doesn't work. That's not how it happens, right? Esports is actually kind of this unique interaction between the people who play your game, the rules of your game, and then the desire to compete, right? Like sports already exists, dude. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. You're not going to make something that is truly outstanding unless you start kind of fanning the flames of what makes that really fun. I think people talk about, hey, is PUBG, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, very, very popular game right now, is that an esport? And you have people who are like, no, it's not an esport because of this and this reason. But at the end of the day, if a lot of people are playing it, and if they're competing, and if that feels kind of meaningful, then that is an esport. And so I think it would be good for anyone watching this course to disavow all notions that you're going to make an esport on your own and you're going to make it outside of your community, because you absolutely are going to need all hands on deck, players and developers, to make that happen.
So when you're patching and balancing an esport, how do you even approach that when you have a different set of audiences for both the professional players and then the general audience?
Yeah, not easily is kind of the answer here. So I worked at Riot Games for a couple of years as a game designer, which I assume is kind of what you're alluding to here. For people out there who don't know, Riot Games patches every 2 weeks. That is a lot of patches when you think about them, and they're not always small, right? And so you might say to yourself, well, that's kind of like fatiguing, right? Like every time I'm going to log in, there's going to be something new. Riot seems to think that is actually a very powerful component of what makes their game good. I think, to get to your question where you're saying, how do you do it for the top level or how do you do it for the bottom level, I think it's important to understand and take a step back and ask, why patch at all? And the reason to patch at all is to create constant excitement. It's to create reasons to engage, right? To say that, if you, as we all know, the best League of Legends player in the world,
clearly,
you might not log in for months at a time if you're already the best. So how do we keep giving you opportunities to be the best? How do we give you opportunities to really show off and be good? And I think patching does that. It also doubly serves, and perhaps more critically serves, as the opportunity to fix imbalances and issues with the game, whether that's game-breaking bugs, whether that's, one character's dominated for way too long, right? So when you start to understand patches exist as sort of a regulatory outlet, as kind of a lever in that regard, as well as a way to spice things up, take that to an esports level and say, hey, I watched the League of Legends World Championship, or I watched, this big game, say Fortnite, say which may be an emerging esport along with PUBG. Let's say I watched the Fortnite World Champions, or I watched Smite, right? How do I know when I watch the next big tournament that's not going to be the same thing again? How do I, as a viewer, know I want to show up? And then on the other side of the coin, how do I know as a player that I want to engage? How do I know that my skills are being tested in a way that feel fair, but also challenging and drive me to improve? And so patching is, you have to strike a delicate balance, but when done correctly, it can kind of stoke those flames on both ends of the spectrum.
So why do you think that there are successful esports that don't patch frequent? So for example, Super Smash Brothers, especially for Melee, and then there's also Smash 4. Melee hasn't patched in 15 years, or how long?
Yeah,
so how is that still successful esport if they haven't patched in 15 years?
There are two versions of Smash Brothers Melee. There's like the one they released in America or Europe or something, and the one they released in the rest of the world. And those are all the version differences you're going to get.
Right.
Without modding, which gets into a whole different can of worms. So we will leave that to the side.
Okay.
So you don't need patches to make a good game, obviously. Right, there are many games that have gone a very long time without patching. Most notably, like you mentioned, Super Smash Brothers Melee. While they certainly help and they perform a service, like I mentioned, the thing about communities that form around games that don't patch, they need to take on a very different set of responsibilities, right? If there is a game-defining bug, or if there is a character whose balance is so out of whack, right? Some people might say Fox in Melee, best of the best. And people go back and forth on that, but generally proven is the best character, right? You might ask yourself as someone who came from those other games and say, well, how can that game flourish if there's just the best? And a lot of that is adaptability, right? You have everyone saying, okay, we'll take it as it is and we'll learn to play around it, right? Different strategies arise, different ways of playing arise because you have these focal points of imbalance that everyone kind of rallies around. And this ends up being one of the larger considerations for games. I'll use an example of Hearthstone. A non-standard esport, if there is a standard for esports, because it's it's kind of
a card game.
Yeah, it's a card game. But Blizzard balances, but infrequently. They balance maybe once every expansion cycle, which is 3 to 4 months. So we'll say maybe they drop 3 to 4 balance patches a year,
right?
Compared to maybe the million that League of Legends does, right? Along with the season shakeups and all that.
Just a rough amount,
So anyways, the thing for them is they try to strike a balance between letting problematic or powerful things be sorted out by the community, but also watching to find out when they can't be. Right, and that I think is something that when we're having the patching conversation and is it important? How important is it? Is something to come around because some players don't want to play a game like League of Legends because everything's constantly changing. They want to learn their one character, their one matchup, and get really good at it. Right? Some people don't want to play fighting games because they don't want to lose to the same stuff over and over again. They don't want to feel like the game is solved. Right? There will never be anything new again in Super Smash Brothers. There will be new players and old players that will rise and fall, but it's going to stay the way that it is, right? And so I think when you're considering esports, you have to really figure out that balance of saying, if something shows up, how long do we go before we respond? Or when do you just not respond because the sorts of play, the sorts of decks that people are creating, the sorts of characters that people are playing to dominate or kind of counter that strategy start being a thing. And so when you understand that, there's really this big sort of ecosystem of designing and curating an esport that isn't as easy as just push that button or pull this lever and it's all
everything's fixed.
Yeah. Oh my God, it would be so easy. I would love if that were the case, but it's definitely not the case.
Okay, so let's talk about specific game developers then. Outside of the patching and balancing, there are some companies or some game developers that aren't as interactive with their esports. And most famously, I think we mentioned Nintendo very briefly. What do you do?
What did you say? Nintendo?
Nintendo.
Ah, yes. Okay.
Oh, okay. Just they've been around for a little bit.
Oh, yeah. I think I've heard of them.
So what do we do, or what does the community do when organizing tournaments or other things like that? And they seem pretty hands-off. What do you do with a grassroots community, for example?
Yeah. So to take a step back, I think there's two important things that I've identified that I think make an esport able to grow. Right. You need, it basically boils down to you need your top players and you need everybody else, and you need to find ways to service them. And so the needs of the everyone else, the 99%, are you need ways to show them how to get better. You need ways to motivate them to play, which can be difficult for fighting games because they cost a good bit of money to get into. That's, notwithstanding controllers and stuff like that. And then you got to find people who want to play. Grassroots communities have their work cut out for them in this case to say, here's tournaments, here's game, here's some kind of fighting game jams where we'll just hang out on the weekend, some Smash Fests or whatever. How do we get people into the community? How do we make them welcome? How do we make them feel like they can actually go up the ladder and make it to maybe one day be a good player? How do we get them to realize that potential? The other thing, focusing on the top players, is you need to be able to tell the story of why these players are the best and how they are so good at what they do. There, in every game, from now until the end of time, there's always a strategy that is dominant. There's always a character that's really good. There's a certain way you can play the game that's deemed the best. And because it's deemed the best, you'll hear cries. If you've even casually touched gamers or games in your life and you're listening to this, you're like, oh, that's cheap.
Always complaints.
It's the salt overflows. They're like, oh, that's not the real way to play the game. You're going to hear that a lot, right? And for a really established community that maybe has an esports league or casters that are very well known, they're trained to say, no, this is why this guy is way better than all of you at this thing, regardless of how good you think it is. But for grassroots communities, you need to find ways to sell those stories. You need to be able to say, hey, Ice Climbers, for example, in Melee, has a glitch they can execute that will essentially one-hit kill their opponent, right? And everybody hates it. for the most part, right? But those people put in just as many hours and compete just as hard
to make it work
as everybody else, right? And so, there come up questions of like, should we discount someone's effort and blood, sweat, and tears they make to being an athlete? And so as a developer or as a community organizer, you need to find ways to get those stories out there. You don't want infighting. You don't want people saying, oh, I won't watch when this character shows up. You need to get people to love all aspects of your game, and you need to find ways to tap into that.
All right, Patrick, let's talk a little bit more about yourself. You worked at Riot Games as a game designer for a while, but now you're doing independent consulting and full-time streaming. What led to that transition? Because that's a pretty big step.
Yeah, it's I didn't know I was going to take those steps at first, so
but it happened.
Yeah, we're here now, right? So I ended up switching jobs about midway through my tenure at Riot. I went from being a full-time game designer to working on sort of the communications side of design, which was basically, we found that, talking to players was kind of a full-time job. Doing things like writing patch notes, appearing on podcasts, videos, things like that. That's a lot of time, and it didn't always make sense to have the people who were perhaps most qualified to speak on those topics, like your leads and seniors, do a lot of that work because they have to do the
actual
work. They have to make the video game that they're doing, right? And so I kind of had a mix of expertise and enough stuff that my job sort of changed. So I still worked with a lot of those guys, but I was now, instead of pitching things that were going to go into the game in meetings, I was trying to take the role of saying, hey, how is this gonna look to people? Remember, this is something that we did a couple patches back. How is this going to affect people? Are we being consistent? How is this gonna work?
Is it weird being the messenger?
It is a little bit, but I think for a lot of the people at Riot and a lot of the people in games in general, you always have to do some amount of this. You cannot design in a silo. It won't work. Right, you're gonna have to talk to them sooner or later, and if you don't do it well, it's gonna go really badly for you. Shoutouts to EA. So it wasn't too weird a transition, especially because I still got to hang out with a lot of the people that I cared a lot about, and I still got to have a decent influence over the game in terms of I would hang out with people and really grind out design ideas and solutions to stuff. I just didn't have to do any of the implementation. Joke's on them. I get to do other stuff. No, but anyways, through this kind of process, I think one thing that I realized that I'm kind of talking about right now is that they go hand in hand. You can't be a full-on communications person and messenger, so to speak, without dipping your toes into the design waters, and you can't do it the other way around either. And so I, was kind of in a place where I was like, hey, I've been doing this for a really long time. I kind of want to try some different stuff. And, I thought maybe I would be doing YouTube essays. I thought I may be doing some more long-form stuff. And I kind of thought, streaming would be a good way to kind of dip my toes into this world that I think, I can influence. And what ended up happening is not something I could have predicted, not something I think, many people I know could have predicted, but, maybe, which is the community that started to form around the sort of content that I make, whether that's, just having fun or actually talking about, the impact that a lot of the games we're playing have on the industry, have on society, our role as developers to not just make the things that you see on screen, but also create the experience overall of it, has really led to the formation of a community that feels very sincere, feels very unique, and feels to me within gaming, just really unlike anything I've ever seen. People have gotten jobs, they've met up in their hometowns and hung out, and people are really bonding in a way that I've never seen, and I'm sort of committed to chasing that to the end of whatever road that's going to lead to. And it's given me a lot of feeling that being there at the beginning of League of Legends gave me, which is hey, I don't know what this is, I don't know where it's going, but it doesn't feel normal. It doesn't feel usual, and it feels like, Riot became, top of their class because there were a lot of people who are good at their job, but they also weren't afraid to talk to people. They also weren't afraid to really go out and just say what's on their mind. Someone posted and said, hey, how'd that bug get in there? They're like, oh, yeah, that's me, my bad. Let me fix it. Or if someone's like, how do I get into the industry? There's people talking their stories and really relating to people. And so I now find that I'm able to have a significant degree of impact on the lives of people that I want to give back to. Because when you work in games, no matter where you work in games. You can't do it without the audience. You can't do it without the players. And they can't really do it without you. And it is a relationship that you really have to focus on. So yeah, I'm along for the ride. I'm having a lot of fun. I think the people who hang out with me are having a lot of fun, and we're going to see how far we can go.
I think the big takeaway from that is community as a whole. Like you mentioned it, whether you're doing patching and balancing or for your own personal thing. And I think that for esports as a whole too, community is such a big deal. So I appreciate you taking the time to come down and be a part of this community and talk about things.
Thank you, dude. I'm very happy to be here.
So there you have it. Whether it's patching, balancing, or tournaments, game design is just one part of the esports puzzle.